Okay, so I'm going to change things around a little bit. Okay, we're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. Okay, I know you guys all have Pigeonhole, but this is a design conference, right? We should be talking to each other. Okay, so I will be picking some questions from Pigeonhole, but I will make preference or put priority to anyone that steps up to the microphone to ask your questions. Okay, so if you have questions, then go to the mic, it will sort of take priority over the number of votes. Okay, so then the other thing I want to do is also, I think we have a fantastic set of panelists here. I've been very inspired by this morning's conversation. So I also want to know if the speakers have anything that they want to learn from the audience. Okay, so I'm going to start the panel in a slightly different way. I'm going to get every speaker to actually first ask a question of you. So to get people thinking, to get the whole conversation started. Okay, I'm not asking you to put your hands up to answer. Okay, so but just to have that thinking in your head so that we can start asking questions. Okay, so without further ado, maybe what I'll do is I'll do in reverse order. I'll start from Adrian. Okay, and I'd like to thank Adrian for his speech just now because he gave me a lot of assurance. I have 2 kids in design school at uni. Okay, so Adrian, please, your questions for the audience.
Okay, is that on? Yep. So I have a very simple question, which is how prepared do you feel you are for the future of work?
Wow.
Raise your hand if you feel very comfortable about the future of work.
Cool.
Okay, we've got...
Stick it right up.
5%, maybe 5% at best. Okay, sorry to scare you.
Thank you. And Nia?
I haven't thought of that question.
You haven't? You want us to move on?
Oh yeah, maybe, okay, that would be
Okay, Tim.
I guess my question is, for each of you, what are the things that you feel that you would love to do the most? The things that you're most passionate about?
Okay, and Eyung? And please reserve all the tough questions for Eyung.
Okay, okay, maybe it's just I copycat. I use the show hand method, right? So because you guys are designer, right? So in the current day, current time, right? How supportive you think your stakeholders are in terms of supporting your design recommendation? If yes, can you please raise your hand? Yes means they are very supportive. Okay, I regretted asking that.
And Mario?
Question for the audience. Who here is confident that who here has confidence in their skills?
confidence of what?
Who here has confidence in the skills that you don't have? So shortcut, confidence and skills, they're not related.
Thank you. You can hang on to that. And yeah?
Okay, last question from me. Who here, by show of hands, have already been watching innovations outside of their industry? Wow, that's great.
Nice.
Great to hear.
Thank you. Okay, so great. Anyone wants to start the ball rolling with a question? Great, thank you, sir. Please introduce yourself and also direct your question if you have.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Francis. Thoroughly enjoyed this morning. I'm a CEO of a company that I founded called Hesed, which is a Hebrew name for grace. Now, in my work, I help a lot of companies through the journey of experimentation and also through using tools like design thinking. I even designed a framework that combines design thinking, agile, and lean in an environment that they know when to use at a certain time. Now, I'm very inspired by Adrian. You mentioned about working in Bali. One of my best performing consultants works in Bali on the beach. It's really happening. So, and he's the best performer. He can go anywhere he wants to work, anywhere, even on the beach. And he's performing so well that I don't care where he is, and he doesn't have to tell me. And this is really happening, Major.
I just have to convince my boss, that's all.
Now, Tim and Mario, fantastic. I really enjoyed that very inspirational work that you have done. Really good and very inspired. My question is this. Once the organizations understand those values and mission and the culture that you described, coupled with the fact that I bring them through a program of several months of using these skills and tools, what's next? After they know all this, now what's next? Because when I say what next, is because there are different levels of understanding, there are different levels of appreciation and the personal agenda, right? So people understand different things differently. Now, to get a whole organization going in one direction, you've got to get everyone on board. Having that said, so what's next after all these are done?
Sorry, after all what is done?
So once they understand all the culture, the definition of the mission they needed for design thinking, and those very good tips that you've shared, the four elements, very good. And once they know all these, they understand it, they internalize it. They also know design thinking, they know lean agile, everything they know, they're applying the framework. But what's next to really bring them to the next level?
So as a designer, I would say it'd be an interesting scenario to work with people that think they know and they think they have it figured out and that it's clear what they need to do. Because then I would like to point out that you're really only considering that which you know and can predict. So you're approaching it out of your own lens. Perhaps not enough out of the systems that are involved or the other stakeholders that are involved. I'd be very concerned if someone top-down would say, yeah, we're done. Yes, we're never done. Design is never done. There might be a solution here today that seems to work really well. I can guarantee it that that's quickly outdated, quickly falling short of new expectations that you hadn't anticipated for. So, yeah, being a designer is a great career choice because your work is never done.
Can I hear Mario's point of view, please, if possible?
Yeah, I think it's important to set the values and the framework, as you were just describing. Getting the alignment within an organization is so important. But it's also important to recognize that process alone doesn't create the outcome. It actually takes skill, and there are some people who are going to be better at it than others. But the idea that design and creative work is actually something that takes skill, it takes effort, it takes dedication, and ultimately practice. I mean, we call the work we do a practice because we've never figured it out fully. We're always practicing at that. And I think of design and creative efforts as really a continuous progression, continuous kind of dialogue. And it's important that if you just say, I've got this process in place, I can plug it in, and therefore I must expect great outcomes, you probably won't achieve it. You need to get practitioners, people who dedicate themselves to understanding and creating new things. And if you're able to do that as an organization, you'll excel maybe more than your peers if you do it better than your peers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Anyone else? Oh, there's one over here.
Hi, Alex, and hello, panelists. My name is John. It's spelled Jawn, like yawn. I'm a professor at the Singapore Institute of Technology in Design and Specialized Business. This question is for the entire panel. How do you translate data or your findings into actionable insights? So whether it's principles you hold to or tools that you use. Actually, I would like to hear from Alex as well, because I know you do this kind of work. I know you're the panelist.
Putting me on the spot.
Yes, of course. I know you're the moderator, but I think all of you here have a lot of experience translating data that is very raw, or findings or observations into actually actionable insights. So if I may be so bold to ask Alex to answer as well. So yeah, maybe all of you. Thank you.
Okay, so being the moderator, I get to get my panelists to answer first.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
You want to start that, Adrian?
Okay.
Ladies first? So at TrendWatching, we track innovation. So those are our data points from around the world. And then when our analysts get together to analyze those data, we ask ourselves those questions that I shared earlier. So what is the drivers of change behind this? What is the basic needs that's being satisfied? What is the emerging expectations? And for example, putting it into practice, we hear a lot of innovations on blockchain. But what is the actionable opportunities for normal businesses who may not have the capabilities to actually implement blockchain in their company? And we realized that why is blockchain so interesting for consumers right now is because of this issues on trust. Public trust in 4 big institutions around the world is falling, and therefore blockchain seems to be the answer to it. But there are other ways where people can actually make use of this insight, and one interesting example that we see is from this grocery supermarket in France, and what they do is they simply use Snapchat to actually they put a QR code on the fish in the grocery shop, and when you scan the QR code, it directs you to a Snapchat, and you can look at the fishermen who are actually catching those fish, and all the way until it's being transported and it reaches the supermarket itself. And you know that Snapchat is only for 24 hours, so because you can see the Snapchat, you know that it's fresh, you can track the transparency. So that is one way of actioning those insights, understanding that what's driving it is actually trust issues and more than the technology itself.
Adrian? You do.
So just, I guess to be specific, so if I take the example of the future of work, so we've been developing a model around what are the jobs that are people doing around the world, and we've been able to utilize the US government. There's a database called the ONET database, which essentially has an entire glossary of jobs and broadly what those jobs do. And then we've been needing to translate onto those jobs, firstly the skills that make up those jobs, and then the effects of different disruptions across that. So there's a fair amount of data kind of manipulation doing that. So I guess there's 2 pieces to the way we approach it. So the first is kind of the heavy lifting piece. So we do use machine learning. We do build I've lost the word. Machine decision-making rules across the data set. And then we feed it as much data as possible. So our data comes from validation of, as we go organisation to organisation, and we start to ask them, let's take the accountant. So there's some assumptions around what accounting does in the ONET database. So as we start to learn more and more what accountants actually do in different organisations, we're starting to refine that, and the machine learning is helping us to do that. And then on the other hand, we're able to ask organisations, how do they plan to disrupt those jobs? So are they planning to disrupt it through any of these different means? Are they outsourcing it or freelancing it, et cetera, et cetera? So you can imagine there's a constant there. So we're relying on the machine to kind of do some of that for us. But I think there's the analysis piece, which is I guess the softer piece, is how do we go then about applying that stuff that's coming out of the machine? And really that's having that hypothesis-driven approach, a scientific approach, right? So what do we think is the case out there? What do we think is the potential problem solver in this situation? And then let's take what's the data saying and go and test the hypothesis with a willing set of guinea pigs or an organisation or whoever it might be. So I think that it comes, my answer always comes in 2 parts.
Thank you. Eyung? Yeah, Tim first. Okay, yeah, go for it.
I would just say that in a way, designers have to really be an important part of filtering data. So whether you're getting structured data, unstructured data, you're taking insights, and it's up to designers and creative people to be working on being sensitive to what aspects of those points of information can contribute to something that's a stronger human outcome. Again, stronger human outcomes lead to better business outcomes, but without that proper framework, I think it's tough to filter through a lot of the information that you receive. And also recognize that it's not a scientific process. It's very messy. we'll try stuff, we'll screw stuff up. It's important to do that. It's important to try to stretch the assumption that maybe a data point gives you. But as an integral part of helping to push things forward and create value, it's important to have that sensitivity, be a filter, and then that helps to lead to better creative outcomes.
Thank you. Eyung?
I would add to that if data comes my way, the questions I start asking is what biases are we working with? Because they have been structured, they have been patterned, so there's bias. And what's the bias I'm bringing into it? And where do we navigate around that? By and large, for me, the biggest challenge in data is the presence of bias. If that goes unnoticed, then all what we're doing is reinforcing it, because that's what that pattern is going to look for, and then bring you back as evidence. So that's something that I would put in the forefront.
Thanks for that. I always think that there are two kinds of lies and statistics. So just being very wary of that, could you actually elaborate on how you deal with some of those biases? I mean, the principles you go by or values that you have in handling biases. Yeah, sorry, Eyung. Yeah, I just want to understand that. Yeah.
Maybe you can fill in as well. Well, there's a whole slew of types of bias that can come into play, but it could be as simple as, let me give you an example. Data says that 16 out of 20 people love this. Data says that a quarter of the people hate it. I've said the same thing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Please.
Okay. So for me, because in my job context, if you want to talk about using data versus in terms of the tangible action or lead to tangible action, I think it's very important, even at the starting point, the intention or the problem statement has to be clear, right? So it's either you collect all the data, but you do not know what you want, then because you collected all, so chances are you will still be able to make sense down the road, or you know the problem statement beforehand, so that you roughly know that which are the data that you need and stuff like that. So in my personal context, I have more success experience with the later, which means that so a lot of times when I work with my business owner, I will ask them, what is the problem statement you want first? I want to make sure the data is available. If not, there's nothing for me to work on. So that will help to drive to more executable item. Then the second part, I also learned the lesson by heart. I also try to manage my stakeholder to say that, if you talk about using data and then leads to actionable item, it will help each other, it will help both parties if we see it as an iterative process. There'll be biases involved, there'll be assumption involved, there'll be a lot of such things, right? But then, as long as we see it as part of the experiment, as an iteration process, that based on this data, based on the outcome, I fine-tune a bit on the parameter, and I put it into test again. Then that a lot of time will help me to drive to the real actionable and useful outcome. That's for me, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for us in public service, so we use data to inform us of like certain patterns of where problems might be, and we use that to guide us as to where we need to deep dive. Yeah, so we go in and we do our ethnographic studies and all, and we may find interesting insights from those, and that's where the experimentation comes in, and we might test out certain concepts to see if certain ideas may or may not work. In fact, that was how we worked very closely with Eyung for the Moments of Life project. We went really using data to point us to some families, and then we found the families and spoke to people, and then using that to guide us into actually what do we need to put into the app. Yeah. So, and it's an ongoing process. So we have a sort of a first MVP out, but there's still a long way to go. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, so I don't see anyone at the mic. I'll pick up a question. Is creating more and more apps the way to go to solve Singapore-related problems? I'll let Eyung start with that.
Wow, this is a tough question, and I think exactly just 2 nights back, I can't sleep well because of this question. So I'm trying to find the answer to this. Frankly speaking, there is no one simple answer to it, right? We all know the nature of app. I assume when you say app, you are referring to native app. That's my assumption I made, right? So there is one end of, there's a strong belief among the designer that apps are supposed to be, especially those utility app, right, are supposed to be single function. I download it, I use it, I launch it, I close it down, right? As long as the use case is sticky enough, I will constantly need to use this app. That is one school of thought. On the other end, there is also a one-size-fits-all or mother-of-all app kind of concept, right? So, we had a lot of discussion within the government, and then the conclusion is that we try to solve this using I think the first thing we need to do is to be very practical about things. If we believe that either of these extremes can cater to all the use case, I think that's the first very bad assumption, right? So what we have done is that we actually, by using the service journey-based approach, that I mentioned just now, right, by going through the ethnographic study, the user research and stuff like that, we start to group certain apps together. So when there are multiple relevant touch points, we group as one single touch point. Naturally, from the other perspective, actually we are folding in, or rather cutting down the numbers of the silo app there in the market, right, especially within our reach from the government perspective. So, so that is for the front end. So the front end, what we think is that whatever rational, reasonable touch point to be folded into one, we are going to fold into one. But we are not going to govern and say that, there should not be no single app out there. For example, Parking SG, right? People love it. Citizens give very good feedback. Do we mean that because it's doing just only one thing, we are going to cut down that app? No, we're not going to do that. But one thing, the other perspective, we want to be very sure about things is that, but if you're talking about the back end, right, that is something that there is only one answer. As long as the use case are repeatable and stuff like that, we need to be as much as possible reuse the back end. But that is a totally different philosophy than the front end channel strategies, right? That will be my very lengthy answer, I'm sorry.
Maybe Mario, would you like to add on to that?
If anything, I would answer yes and no. Yes, if it is in the context that an app is needed for what you want to do. No, if you're doing it for the sake of doing an app.
Cool. Okay, I'll pick another question. Okay, this one, and maybe I'll start with Tim to get this question.
Let's see, what is the toughest habits? It's probably it's probably the ability. Let's see, the ability to start to think about what we're doing in a way that allows us to take more responsibility for what we're doing. When we tend to follow a rote process, or we take a sort of a structure as a given, it tends to drive away from learning and evolving and thinking for yourself. I think it's important to continue to do that. I think that challenging assumptions, questioning authority, all of those things that are uncomfortable. Yeah, I know, be careful. All of those things are things that lead to creative outcomes. And it's something that the more we suppress that type of interaction, probably the less successful we can be.
Okay, thanks. Anyone would like to add to that?
So this is actually a sweet spot for me. I spend a lot of time talking with senior organizational leadership almost exactly on this question. So maybe one of my clients are hidden out there somewhere. So I think I can count at least 5 or 6, but I'll just give you maybe the top 3. So the first one is really around the leadership mindset. So traditional leaders think in hierarchies. They think in chains of responsibility, and they think in terms of the more people I have, the better manager I am. And I just need to keep those people in my box for as long as I possibly can. Workplaces haven't worked very well. So the reason why that has worked is because of the industrial revolution, where process manufacturing was the way. So let's break down everything we do into component parts and then put them in segments, and it's okay to have handovers because we know what's coming from the previous person on the production line. However, I think everyone in this room would agree with me, but that's not the way we need to work in the future. So that leadership mindset, top-down, control of everything needs to shift into more of an enabling, how can I get out of the way, how can I get rid of functionals, functional way of things, how can I support my employees to be, think more out of the box, take more risks, all that kind of good stuff that as design thinkers we need in the organisation. Which leads me to the two others. So one is risk-taking. And coming from an audit firm or an organisation that's bounded on the basis of auditors, this is something that Deloitte itself has struggled with as well. So how can we allow people to take risks that are acceptable risks, and then through failing in taking those risks and encouraging failing, we're able to learn as an organisation. So just that sentence, having a conversation with a CEO of a bank, is you can almost see their hair falling out as you're talking to them. So because if we can't allow people to take risks and fail, then as organisations we're not going to be innovative. Then the third piece is really a mindset for the whole organisation, which is this idea of getting out of the concept of I am my job description. We need to allow people to walk into a room, participate in whatever job task or job activity with their skills and capabilities, their passions, their personal missions, and therefore they'll be much more interested in solving that problem and working with the people that they're working with in their room, and we'll get a lot more done and solve a lot bigger problems that we need to solve.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the floor again? Okay, we have I'm told we have 5 minutes more. Yeah. So what I'll do is, if there's no one standing up, then I'll pick the next highest vote, which is the one to Mario, but I want everyone probably to pick up on it as well. So, Mario, ugly, unpredictable, and incomplete are usually aren't usually the principles of government. I think that's something that I'm very interested in as well. Yeah, please.
So first off the bat, I'm a visual designer by trade. When I say ugly, I don't mean what you put together and give as a deliverable. That has to be beautiful. That has to be crafted. What I mean is it's okay for you to come across as a little bit less perfect. You do not hold all the answers. You're not supposed to. If you feel that you are, you're probably in the wrong room. Unpredictability, if they can prove to me how predictable things are, I might change my mind, but I have an easier time proving just how unpredictable things are than the opposite.
Would you like?
And there's this expression, right? It's not what you know that will hurt you, it's what you thought you knew but just wasn't so. And for government organizations, it's that what usually bites them back in the butt. It's what we thought we knew that just isn't so. If you accept that, then you're also willing to kind of go deeper and find out what is lacking, what has not been done complete. Your government, so you're setting out things that need to cast a hook 20, 30, 50 years down the line. So you need to understand how contexts are changing and evolving. You need to understand a layer of variables that just don't ever come on the table of an MNC who just wants to push products for the next season. Therefore, by default, what you do is incomplete. There is no completion date on it. We often do exercises in work groups where we like to have our participants write how success would look like by the time the project is done. And then we spike it by asking, now 10 years down the road, then what? And usually what they write is, well, the same thing from 10 years ago, but better. So that's how far people think, you know. If you're in government sectors, I would invite you to think beyond your KPIs. And then things will remain incomplete, probably a little unpredictable, and you'll feel vulnerable. And it's that vulnerability that might come across as a bit ugly, but it's okay.
Eyung, you want to add to that?
Okay. Mario, guess what? Actually, I'm very comfortable with that. Yeah, I think you are comfortable with that. Okay, maybe the word ugly, I wouldn't go in front of the minister and say, hey, let's celebrate, my design is ugly. Okay, that one, I know that. It's a joke, it's a joke. But I think what you said makes a lot of sense, right? And in fact, slowly we are also opening up, right, to operate the government in a very different way, right? Things like unpredictable, right? Things like incompleteness. So for example, like even like what Alex has mentioned, we should work together for the Moments of Life Act, right? I think now the senior stakeholders are willingly accepting the term used in Agile, we call it MVP, right? Minimum Viable Product, right? This is a beta, and then slowly, from the feedback we gather, then slowly, how do we complete it? If you think the rationale behind the Parking SG app, at the beginning, the team doesn't even have a timeline at the beginning, doesn't even have a timeline to say that when is the day that I want to officially launch this app. Or rather, in other words, they say that this is a forever beta, right? Because forever, I'm improving this. Then there's also another school of thought within the government to say that now we should change the term we use. We should not call this as an IT project. We should call it a product, right? We should try to align from the private industry as well. Because project, instinctively, what it means to us is really, I give you a spec, and then you just carry out, and then after that, once you deliver the spec, case closed, go back, sleep, But product is not. Product is continuously improving, and it will never be so-called complete, right? So I totally align with that. Thank you.
I'll just add one quick thing. I think the points that Mario makes are perfect, and one of the nice things about that is, both for designers as well as governments to remember, is a certain degree of humility. And I think that what you're expressing there means that we don't have it all figured out. We are all, pulling to do it in a better way. But I think having that humility in the work you do, a lot of designers get caught up in themselves as well and get lost in an ego. But I think it's really important that those qualities continue to reinforce any endeavor you're on.
Okay, so I'll take the opportunity to then ask that last question that has the most votes. Okay, which is, how do you see the role of the designer changing in the next 5 to 10 years? And how will this impact the education of a designer? Adrian, maybe?
Okay. I think the definition of what a designer is changing. So, and the number of use cases that need a designer are multiplying exponentially based on the way that we're working and the challenges that we're facing, both positive and negative. There's opportunities and challenges. So I think I see the role of the designer changing in the sense that it's not just going to be designers designing products or designers designing services. We're going to need the skills and the capabilities of designers in many different aspects of both organizations, governments, and solving for some of the biggest societal challenges that we have. So how will that impact the education of a designer? I think the education of a designer needs to be a bit more holistic. We need to be thinking of how can we utilize these core skills that we're learning, but to solve a much broader set of challenges.
Nia?
I don't know, actually. The role of the designer, we don't really track specifically specific job functions, but we do track a trend that we call the new normal, and it's all about how just jobs in general, how they are changing, and how everything's going to be flat, no more hierarchies, and people can do remote jobs and all that, and how, like what Adrian has mentioned earlier, if your skills can be automated, therefore you need to look more into creativity and things that the robots can't do for you. And so I think this is so relevant in Singapore because the education system can be quite rigid. You need to study 10 years exams. That is such an interesting concept to me. Like when I first moved here, like I need to study all the way from 10 years back. So yeah, like, so all these things I think needs to change, I feel. Yeah, so yeah, creativity, spontaneity, and all of these things which can't be automated by robots needs to be put more into the education system.
Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, I think just the role of the designer, I think it's being appreciated probably at a higher level in all forms of business and services, which is great for designers.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at the types of things that are changing, one of the things that we look at commonly is it's becoming more and more complex. And what that means is it's more and more difficult to solve complex problems by yourself. And that means you have to, in terms of impact of the education of the designer, is look at this idea of team of teams and being able to work with others in a creative context to create creative outcomes. And I think that's one of the things that we see more and more in education shifting.
Great. Eyung?
So I think it's somehow along that line, but in lack of a better word, last time I see agile delivery team as a cross-functional team, and designer is just one of the roles. That was in the past. Now, even I see a team of designers as a cross-functional team. So inside, there are people that look after behavioral insights, there are people look after emotional design, look after UI, and user research and stuff like that. I think this trend is going to move.
For me, the role of a designer, I've been evangelizing that for a bit already. You're going to be facilitators. You may not be visually design based or any of the arts and crafts, but you're going to facilitate across the different disciplines, the different silos, including the silo of the project or program that you're on. You're going to facilitate possibilities. You're going to get the best out of people. You're going to recognize what is a good input, what is less ideal input, and you'll be the one orchestrating it towards not a finish line, but towards an outcome and towards results that again can be measured. And impact in education, if you haven't started already, please get your head around systems thinking, because that will be crucial. If you consider that anything and everything can be sensor enabled and give you data, systems thinking will be critical in that. And to Tim's point, learn how to work with people. The education system right now, and I'm not giving you a swipe here, all students work individually on their idea and the quality of their thinking. Then they go into the workplace and they get a shock. It's like a cold shower, because they're not supposed to do that. And fact check, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to think alongside with people and build on ideas and recognize where's the value, what do I need to defend, or what do we need to let go. So that's also something that I would like to see change in the education sector. System thinking, and don't do stuff on an island. This is a team sport.
Thank you very much. So thanks very much to the panel. I think that we ended off with a very nice question, and I thought that is really fantastic food for thought for a conference like this. So please help me thank the panel.